Finally, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio is presented by DSI Sportsbook. Head on over to DSI, use that promo code BTB and the number 25. You'll get a $25 free bet just for signing up, 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook, and 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino as well. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. 2 segments on today's show. The first, our Westgate SuperContest Selections segment with myself and Sports Cheetah. 4 of my picks look like they're going to be made here on today's segment. Then I'll have to pick one more from the leans that I've got. But we'll chat a little bit about that whole Colts situation last week with the Colts and Texans, all that line value that was out there, and then also some of the other challenges for Week 10. So without further ado, here is that Super Contest segment with myself and Sports Cheetah. All right, I'm joined now by Sports Cheetah from WagerTalk.com and also PodcastU.Vegas for our Week 10 Westgate Super Contest Selection segment. Preston, how's it going today, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Appreciate your time as always here, and hopefully I can roll over a little bit of that momentum from last week. Went 4-1. I'm now 24-21 with the Bang the Book podcast entry, BangTheBook.com entry owned by my boss, 25-19-1 after a 3-2 week. And Cheetah, it's really not a big surprise to see the field come in at 57.22% last week, 7,225 winners, 5,402 losers, 943 pushes, 1,675 of the 2,748 entries took the Indianapolis Colts last week. So when that happens, you've got a touchdown worth of line value. 57% isn't all that surprising.
Yeah, I mean, if majority of everyone at least got one, so they're basically, if they go 50, 500, the rest of the 4 they're going, that's a 60% win rate going 3-2. So yeah, not surprising. 57% is probably still a little high because, I mean, in the end, they could have easily not covered the number. They went outright, so it didn't end up mattering. But, I'm curious what the number would be if, say, Houston actually covered and all the Indianapolis bets lost. I'm not sure. I think people still picked pretty well outside of that game, too, for it to be as high as 57%.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what it was. The top 3 consensus plays, Indianapolis, the Rams and Dallas, accounted for 3,443 of the 7,225 winning picks. So the fact that the top 3 consensus actually came through, very, very significant, obviously, for that segment of the field. 40.23% overall now on the season. And just to follow up with your question here, 1,675 entries took the Colts. 70 took the Houston Texans. So, either those were people that were looking to get the 2-game swing or people that played the Thursday night game and didn't know about the Deshaun Watson injury, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, we had 1,605 more entries on the Colts than the Texans. So, yeah, that would have made a very, very significant change, to say the least. But, like I said, 48.23% overall. Last week in the Super Contest Gold, 222 winners, 212 losers, 26 pushes, 51.15%. 55 of the 94 entries took the Colts, so that's 58.51% on Indianapolis in that stale line value, 48.86% overall. I don't think it's a big surprise that a higher percentage of the traditional Super Contest field took Indianapolis than the Gold, is it?
Yeah, that's not surprising me at all. I was curious what the number was going to be. I hadn't actually seen it myself, but but a little over half used it in the Gold, whereas it was 70+% in the traditional. Most people, I think, if they're doing the Gold, they are more familiar, I guess, with the strategy and the game theory to it all, and they probably know you're not supposed to technically use the Colts if you're trying to play from behind and catch up, because you're hoping that everyone up at the top is using it and that it doesn't cover and you get another point somewhere else. So, not surprising to see that come in lower than the traditional.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about that game because it's such a unique situation, and it's really something that can only happen here, in these handicapping contests. I mean, I'm sure there were some people out there in the betting market that did take the Colts early in the week at +13 and wound up getting, a significant amount of line value there in that. But I will say, obviously, as I told listeners, because we found out about the Deshaun Watson thing maybe 10 minutes after you and I were done recording the Super Contest segment last week. But I had a pretty big dilemma in terms of deciding what to do with that game because, like you said, from a game theory standpoint, and for somebody that's trying to play catch-up, I mean, I am 8 points off the lead, and I think the top 50 is 28 points right now, so I'm 4 points out of cashing. You could make a very strong case that it's in my best interest not to take that Colts game and hope that somehow Houston covers that number. And, of course, they came nowhere close to doing it. But I did have a really hard time with that in terms of narrowing down my card last week because I liked the Rams, and I knew they were going to be a consensus pick. I liked Dallas. I knew they were going to be a consensus pick because there was a little bit of line value on that game as well. And I figured Denver would be a very popular side since I was taking them because they were plus 8.5 and they came down to 7. So that was one of the challenges that I had last week was eventually I couldn't pass on the line value with the Colts, but because I knew that so many of my other picks were going to be popular, there was actually a chance I'd leave it off.
Yeah, I'm honestly, I was, we were talking about it just right before you hit record, and you like, well, I went 4-1, you know, and I don't feel like I made up any ground, and it's probably to the extent that just so many people went at least 3-2, and there were going to be plenty of people that went 4-1 or 5-0, and so that's what makes it tough is you feel good because you had a good week, but when everyone's getting the same win that you got, it's ultimately worthless. Now, not everybody did. Like, you know, there was 30% of the people that didn't. So you have, I guess, a slight advantage there. But you have to think that the people on the top that you're trying to catch up to, even a wider margin or a larger margin, the majority of those people were using the Colts just because they needed the win to stay up top. So it's generally, I would guess, the majority of the 30% that didn't use Colts were in the middle pack to the bottom of the current standings. And so when you're trying to play catch up, and with one of those, it ultimately ends up not meaning anything, and you're costing yourself a game, I think, of the remaining games possible to try to catch up. And so, it's tough. I ended up using the Thursday night game, and I didn't use the Colts-Texans matchup just because I didn't like it. And then the Watson injury news came out later that day. So I was saved in that regard. That I didn't have to make the decision, but I'm pretty certain I never would have even considered the Colts. When it comes down to it, I just think there's too much value to give up when you're only getting 5 games a week over 17 weeks, and now we're headed into week 10. We're just over halfway done or whatever. Like, just giving up like 3 or 4% of your remaining potential points by picking that game when everyone ahead of you is picking it. It just doesn't end up adding up in my head. So I always try to stay away from those. Not even try. I do stay away from those. And then last week I would have stayed away, but I didn't have to since I had submitted Jets anyways Thursday early afternoon.
And that is the challenge, too. Like you said, I mean, you only have 40 picks left in this thing to make now. I mean, you've already made 45 of the 85 selections. And, yeah, I mean, that was a point that it's great that you got it, but so did a lot of other people. And like you said, a lot of other people that got it are probably the ones in front of you. Because if you're up there, in the top 50, if you're in the money, if you're in the top 100, whatever, you're going to take that game because you want to make sure you get that point because you don't have to play catch-up. So, that there was a lot that went into that decision, and I kind of reluctantly came to the final call to take the Colts because ultimately I couldn't really decide what 5 games I wanted to use. And I wound up making the cut of the Buccaneers, which worked out for me because they didn't cover, and I would have went 3-2 instead of 4-1. So, it's amazing to look at all of the different considerations week after week in this thing. It's not just, handicapping the NFL card. I mean, you're handicapping the contest, and that only goes up and increases in importance because as you get deeper into the contest, and like you just talked about, if you start giving up a point to go on the same side as everybody else, you run out of times to make up that point.
Yeah, no, it's exactly why, unless, like you brought up, and I was saying earlier, unless you're already in that 50s, maybe a good gauge. Like, if you're in the top 50, you want the points to stay up. But if you're in the middle of the pack or lower, you have to play catch-up. And so when you're giving up a percentage of the allotted points you can even get by picking a game, everyone's going to have the same side. It's the real strategy to it all. I would say if you are in, like, people that are listening, like, a lot of them probably do, like, their own individual pools with friends or family or whatever, work pools that use the contest lines. In that regard, like, if you're one of, like, 20 entries and, say you're in 5th or 6th or 7th, and you're probably playing with people that aren't even as into it, and, like, maybe they don't even know that it's a super stale line, I think in that situation you're fine just taking the Colts because it's a huge edge, and you only have 4 or 5 people you need to pass up for the second half of the season. But in one like the actual Super Contest where there's a little more money at stake, for one, there's people that generally know what they're doing, and also there's just so many entries. That's when you need to really try to differentiate yourself on how you're attacking the 5 games that you select. But I guess I wanted to just make that point for people that are listening that aren't in the actual Super Contest but do similar pools on a much smaller scale. I think the actual strategy would be different than in those as far as like what's optimal. So I think if you're in a smaller pool, say like 10, 20, even 30 or 40 people, and you use the Colts, actually that's fine, depending on where you're at in the standings. But for the big one, I think it's just there's so many entries and stuff. You have so much ground to make up and so many people to pass it. It is more optimal not to use the Colts in those spots.
Let me ask you about this. I know you said that you didn't use the Colts for your individual entry because you played the Thursday night game, and like you said, you probably wouldn't have used them anyway. What about in your team entry? I mean, is that a discussion that you guys had? What decision did you ultimately come to?
In my team entry, my favorite play was Jets, so that was my pick, so we all had to get it in by Thursday. And we didn't even have to have the discussion. We absolutely wouldn't have used Colts, though, either. Like, I think everyone would have been on board with just passing on Colts and rooting for, the Texans to win by 14 or whatever. And, a good portion of the time, I mean, people think, that's never going to happen. I mean, you think of how much real variance there is within, like, a touchdown. If you're saying that the spread at 6.5 is 50-50, them winning by 14 or more is going to happen like 1 out of 3 times or maybe slightly more than that. So it's like that happens a ton. Like there's a lot of like times when everyone loses the Colts bet, and that's just so much added value to not picking that game when you really break down. Because I think you see 6 or 7 points and you're just enamored with it because you're trying to get every little edge, and you're used to betting in real life, right? Just where you have to take the best numbers and this and that. And so you see 6 points of value, and you just think, I have to fire away. But when it's all said and done, 6 points is a big edge, but it's not like it's something where the Texans couldn't have just won by 2 touchdowns or more. I mean, they're doing that, I think, more often than 1 out of 3 times. So I guess you got to kind of look at things that way too. And so for us, I think it would have been a no-brainer for the team entry not to use the Colts in that way either. But we, again, submitted Thursday, so it didn't end up being a conversation.
Well, and maybe this is a topic for another day here because I do want to run through my picks. But one thing I do want to know a little bit here, and again, we can maybe take a deeper dive into this in terms of a math standpoint, is the number of people chasing stale line value here higher than it should be? I mean, obviously, we don't know exactly who's doing what and who's picking what, but is it sort of an overblown angle in this contest?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I would have to go back and look at like which games were, more consensus and which ones were the stale numbers. My guess is a lot of people for the first half of the season in the Super Contest try to use the stale ones that they think, the market is implying there's an edge, and they're just trying to accumulate wins to put themselves in a good spot come, week 9, week 10, week 11, and then they'll have to kind of maybe adjust from that point based on where they're positioned in the standings. So I'm guessing there's probably some of that. Not everybody. Honestly, when it comes down to it, I just try to pick the 5 games that I think have the best chance of winning early on. And there's the occasional, after a few weeks, if you're down already and you had a slow start, then you want to start looking at some of the game theory things and which ones to stay away from if you can help it, and half-point picks or not, or whole numbers, this and that. But I think I'd have to go through and see how many people are actually using the more stale lines, like not the obvious ones like the Colts, but like the Broncos were my 3rd favorite game last week. So I used them, but I was pretty sure because like it moved from 8.5 to 7. Like a lot of people were going to use the Broncos, so it was kind of a weird spot. But I only, I bet the Packers and the Jets and the Broncos, and I was, I should probably just use it for the contest. And it was on Thursday anyway, so I had to get it in. But that's one where, if I have a card where I like 6 or 7 games, then that's even one where most people are probably using Broncos, and I wouldn't typically do it unless I really, really liked it as an actual real bet that I made in real life on the side of the contest, which I did, and I got killed and had no chance. But I think that you have to kind of differentiate those too, where you're trying to decide, okay, the Colts is like 6 points, everyone's going to use it, but there's still those ones that only move like a point or a point and a half. I think the Falcons and Panthers was another one where a lot of people were using Falcons and that lost. That's one where I definitely would have. I actually ended up betting the Panthers on Sunday just when I got to +3. I thought it was kind of a crazy move. And so a lot of people did lose them probably on the Falcons, getting a point or a point and a half, whatever it was in the contest. And that's another one, like I just never would have probably considered it unless I just loved the side, kind of like I did the Broncos. But I'm curious now that you asked if there are, I guess, more precise numbers we could see, which consensus are like the ones that were the most stale, and seeing if there is some sort of correlation there. It wouldn't surprise me, especially in the first half of the Super Contest.
Well, and I think about it, too, in terms of, anytime there's a game that lands on the number, and especially if it's a game that draws a lot of attention, how many times do you see some media member tweeting out Vegas knows in terms of, the game falling around the spread? And that's something that I kind of think about here in terms of this line value, and in terms of, obviously not all line value is created the same. I mean, a move from, if the Packers go down to 4.5 instead of 5.5, not overly significant to grab the Packers at 5.5. Now, if you've got a game where the Giants go to 3.5 when you get them at 2.5 here, that's a little bit more significant. But also, the thing I'm kind of wondering about in terms of the line value as well is, the number doesn't always matter. I mean, sometimes 2.5, 3.5 are going to cover. The Colts obviously last week covered 13 and 6.5, because they won the game outright. So that's another thing that kind of factors into this whole line value discussion is, how often does that line value or even the line itself end up mattering?
Yeah, it's true. It seems like it's, once every 2 weeks maybe you'll have a game that, it ends up mattering. And if you're betting every single game, it probably happens more often. If you're betting earlier in the week versus later when you pick, it'll come into play, and that's why getting the best number is important. So you have that extra little edge on the times that it does matter. But if you're only betting, say, 2 to 4 or 5 games a week, it's probably not going to happen every, once a month that it actually maybe matters. So 1 out of 20 games or something like that's probably a good estimate on when your number, if you're assuming you beat the close and you had a point of value, like how often it'll actually come into play. And if it's always 3s and 7s, then that's going to be more often than 1 out of 20. But you're making points on, like, if you bet +5.5, closes 4, how many times does it land 5? That's not very often at all. So kind of overall, you can get general estimation, I'd say, is like 1 out of 20 times you bet your number will come into play, whether you took a poor number or a good number early. That's probably about right.
Well, of course, one of them was that damn Jets game that I played 2 weeks ago, where it was 4.5 in the contest, 6 in the market. Of course, it falls 5 because why the hell not? But so hey, I'm lucky, right? I fell victim to that one time out of 20 or whatever that's actually going to happen. All right, let's look at the Week 10 card here, and I actually like this card this week, which is probably a kiss of death, which means I'll go 1-4, 0-5. But there are several games that I do like here this week. Beginning with number 12 in the rotation order, that's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are +2.5, hosting the New York Jets. Now, we didn't really see a number for this game early in the week. I think 5 Dimes had it, I want to say pick'em or something like that, or maybe -3 on the Tampa Bay side. Truthfully, I don't even remember what it was. But, Jameis Winston announced out with the shoulder. Then Mike Evans is announced out with a suspension. And we see a pretty significant move out there on this game, at least in terms of the books that did have a number up. But for me, when I look at this game, I don't think the drop-off from an injured Jameis Winston to Ryan Fitzpatrick is really that big of a deal. This year, Jameis Winston, 61.4% completion percentage with a 10-6 ratio. Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick from 2011 to 2015 was at 61.3%, 110 touchdowns to 74 interceptions. I'm going to eliminate 2016 there as a little bit of an outlier because that was just a weird situation with the Jets. He signed real late, didn't really want to play there, all that type of thing. So, injured Jameis Winston was basically a little bit worse than healthy Ryan Fitzpatrick over a 5-year span from 2011 to 2015. So I don't think that any adjustment needs to be made here, but one has been made in the marketplace, and I think it creates some value on Tampa Bay.
Yeah, there probably is a little bit of value. I think Evans is maybe a bigger deal than, the drop-off from Winston to Fitzpatrick, if there even is one. I will say that, as far as the quarterback goes, last week they were in the second half. They were playing the Saints. There was a lot of stalled drives from Tampa Bay in the first half. I think 3 inside the Saints 40 where they had to punt short and maybe a turnover or something. And the Saints were moving it fine. So the total, when the news came out that it was Fitzpatrick, dropped from 27 to 26.5. I actually got a 25 here in town. And I played over because I thought is Winston really an injured Winston, like you're saying? Is he really that much better than Fitzpatrick? And, they're probably going to be able to score, and the Saints have been moving it fine. And sure enough, like in 5 minutes, there was 2 touchdowns, and I'm thinking, all right, this is great. And then they each missed a field goal so that when the touchdown in the fourth quarter happened, it only landed 21 instead of 27. So I lost. But that's like evidence of me saying the same thing as you are, where I thought the fact that the total moved down from 27 to 25 at Westgate is where it was, I think. I thought it was insane just because of a Winston to Fitzpatrick drop-off. And they were going to have to throw a lot and play from behind because they were down big at halftime. So anyways, I thought it was a good bet, and maybe it was, and more often than not it would pay off, but it didn't. But it goes to show here in this game with the total and I think the side, both are, I think, overreactions. And so for me, it might be a good teaser piece if people are out there betting teasers a lot. You rarely will hear me say that, but the 2.5 up to an 8.5, unless it got to 3, which I don't see it getting all the way to 3 by itself. If it did, then you're better off just betting +3 straight. But if it stays at 2, 2.5, or even 1.5, then this would probably be one of the teaser sides, maybe like once a month, where I really think is going to offer some value with Tampa at home, Fitzpatrick, and a Jets team that they've hung around in games it seems like they shouldn't, and they've won games they shouldn't. They've also lost games that maybe you expected them they were going to win. So it's one that probably ends up going close, going down to the wire. And I wouldn't hate having a +8.5 in my pocket.
Another thing I like about this game, too, here is that for Tampa Bay, their defensive numbers do not look good. But Levante David missed a couple of games. Quan Alexander missed 4 games. He's probably the best all-around defensive player in the back 7. Obviously, Gerald McCoy might be the best player on this defense. But this Jets offense is pretty average. The way that they move the football, it is impressive what they've been doing in terms of a high completion rate. They've had some good running plays. They've had some good short throws. But they lose a wide receiver in Jeremy Curley here, who didn't have a ton of targets, but it's still going to elevate somebody else on this roster into a little bit bigger of a role, and that may not work out too well for them. You've got the Fitzpatrick angle against his old team. You've got a Jets team on the bye next week coming off of a division win. Yeah, they have some extra time, and I know that's been a really good betting angle for people playing that team off the Thursday night game. But one final point I'll make about Tampa Bay here. This is their only home game until December 10th. So this is a spot that teams generally like to circle. If they're not playing at home for a month, this is a game that they want. And I'm going to take them here to take care of business in this one. I do think they win the game outright. Like I said, I don't think the Winston to Fitzpatrick thing is that big of a deal. Evans being out hurts, but Fitzpatrick's a guy that's smart enough to go through his progressions and find somebody. So I like Tampa Bay here. And again, I think it's interesting because I liked Tampa Bay last week. Didn't take them. Maybe I dodged a bullet there, and maybe I'll be able to pick one up here with Tampa Bay this week. All right, the next game I'm looking at here on the card, I got the Buffalo Bills. They're +3 at home against the New Orleans Saints. So like I said, I talked about maybe going up against the Saints last week. Decided not to do it. That worked out in my favor. Maybe this one here is the week to go against them. And I also like this one a little bit because I think it's a little bit contrarian. And we've seen favorites and trendy dogs do very, very well here over the last few weeks. That's something where the luck generally tends to run out for the public when it comes to the NFL. So I think this is a pretty good spot in that regard. But more importantly than that, which is mostly just an anecdotal type of thing, the Saints have to go on the road to Buffalo. It's going to be chilly. It's going to be rainy. It's going to be damp, wind chill in the upper 30s. Not really something that Drew Brees likes. And I certainly think as he continues to age, it's something that he's going to like even less. The Bills are methodical on offense. They can slow the game down. They can run the ball. New Orleans can't stop the run. 4.7 yards per carry allowed. Bills should get back Charles Clay this week, who has only played 5 games this year, and he's still their leading receiver in yardage. So, yeah, on one hand, that's an indictment of the Buffalo offense, but also it's nice for them to get him back. They are off of extra rest as well from that division loss to the Jets on Thursday. So I think it's a little bit of a bounce-back spot here for Buffalo, and I think the situation sets up well with Brees having to come north and play in some suboptimal conditions for him.
Yeah, I really like the angle outside of the fact that you're getting a 3 when it's, it was at least 2.5 in market most places. and it's come up to 3 now. So maybe there won't be the advantage there in the half point when it's relative to market come Friday night or whenever you're turning them in. But the Bills are a team that I think just kind of performed better than people expected and anticipated entering the season. Even their last, say, like 6 games here I'm looking at, they lost to the Jets last week, and that was a good spot, I think, for the Jets. But the Bills, and so they had some extra time to prep for this game for one, but the Bills, they beat the Raiders by like 20. They beat the Buccaneers. They lost close games to the Bengals on the road. They beat the Falcons on the road. They beat the Broncos at home by 10. They beat some pretty decent quality teams. The Saints have been so hot. I tried betting against them last week too, and I used the Buccaneers. This is another one where I think it's definitely Bills or nothing. And since it is a 3 on the card here for the Super Contest, I imagine that's one that I'll end up using since I don't have 5 that I love this time around, and I'm probably going to be scratching for a 4th and 5th, and that's one of the, I guess, 3 that I've looked at so far that I agree with as far as your side. And I don't know if, Breeze, his splits obviously at home and away are pretty drastic because he plays in a dome versus playing outside. But even outside, it's probably going to be cold in Buffalo. That's another level of outside rather than just playing, in the air. It's that it's going to be cold and crisp. I don't know if it's going to be wet or anything either. But that's definitely going to take its toll. And I think I'm shocked to see this number actually come up from 2.5 to almost 3 flat places. And I think those are the right side, especially if you can get that field goal minus 110.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be in the low 40s here, chance of showers during the game. And I can attest, being somebody that lives in a place where the weather is really bad for about 8 months out of the year, that damp 40-degree stuff is almost worse than snow. It just feels gross to be outside. I would rather it be 25, low humidity, snowflakes flying around, that type of thing, because that chilly dampness is just, it's just awful to be in. And if you're somebody that plays in a dome, you're somebody that lives in a warm weather climate, that's just not an ideal situation for you. Also, you've got a New Orleans team here that's won 6 in a row, all by 8 or more points. And, in the NFL, people call it parity, people call it inconsistency, whatever they want. It's hard to run together a string like that and then keep it going week after week after week. And I know that the Saints are playing better. I love the Saints coming into this season. I thought their defense would be much better. I lost on them in each of the first 2 weeks of the season, but I've gone back to the well a couple of times since. They've played an injured Jameis Winston. They've played Mitch Trubisky. They played Brett Hundley. Stafford in that wild game where the Lions put up 38 and gave up some defensive touchdowns and all that. Jay Cutler, Cam Newton back in week 3 before he got it figured out, and then he lost it again. But the Saints really haven't been tested by too many good offenses. And the Bills aren't a good offense, but the Bills they take care of the football, and they can run the football. And that's a dimension that New Orleans doesn't really get a whole lot, and certainly hasn't gotten here over the last few weeks. So I think Buffalo controls the line of scrimmage. I'm a little worried about it being on the key number of 3 in the event that it does wind up being a push. But still, I think the Bills are the right team here. And like I said, I think this one's a little bit contrarian from the field. So maybe it'll be against the consensus.
I think that this is an interesting one. I had someone trying to argue against me because I like the Jets. He actually liked the Bills. You mentioned how they take care of the ball. Going into that game last week, he was talking about the turnover margin for the Bills. And I forget, I'm forgetting who the coach is that's running the defense, but anyway, he was at Carolina for 3 years prior. You probably all remember his name, but they had really good turnover margin and turnover differential in Carolina for 3 straight years. And then going into the Jets game, I think the Bills already were plus 12 or something in turnovers. And I said a lot of the fumble stuff is luck. You look back historically, if you drop a fumble on offense or whether you're on defense, it's basically 50-50 exactly on who recovers it. So if you look back and you're saying, okay, well, the Bills are plus 12, but they've fumbled 0 times and recovered 8 fumbles, that's partly weird variance. And you look back at Carolina's seasons where they were plus 19 or plus 20 in turnovers, and that was part of it. But at some point, I gave them some credit to the point where if this type of defense, the coach, his name's escaping me, but at 4 years in a row of being able to do this with your defenses, maybe he's coaching them better at forcing more fumbles, or ultimately they're able to just play a defensive scheme that that relies on big plays like that, and they didn't have them against the Jets, and which is why the Jets ended up winning that game. But it does kind of feel like if Breeze is throwing and it's wet and the conditions are bad, or even the guys running the football. Ingram fumbled twice the other day. It was 2 games ago, I think it was against the Bears, in like the end of the game in the fourth quarter. Maybe that'll come back into his head, and now you're trying to run in the rain. And by the way, we talked about the defense. The Saints' rush defense isn't very good. The Bills is. If it comes down to a running battle, the Bills are tied for 7th in opponent yards per play on the ground, and New Orleans is 29th. They give up a full yard more per play. So that's an advantage Bills too. But anyway, back to the turnover thing. I think the Bills are this kind of strangely, weirdly plus turnover margin team that people might be fading because generally you would just fade that type of positivity. But you made the point. Now getting back to what made me think of it, they take care of the ball on offense, and that's part of it too. Is when Tyrod Taylor's only thrown and turned it over twice all year, then your turnover margin is going to be good too. And obviously turnover margin is correlated to, outscoring your opponent and winning games. So if people didn't realize or know that before, the Bills are definitely one of the better teams offensively taking care of the ball. It's not the best so far in the league, and they're one of the best at forcing turnovers, at least to this point. So they're going to be in games like no matter what, the way that they're at least stylistically approaching things on offense and defense.
Yeah, that's Sean McDermott that you're talking about. And in his 9 years as either defensive coordinator or a head coach, his team has finished in the top 5 in interceptions 6 times. So he started as a defensive backs coach, went up to linebackers coach, then became a defensive coordinator. Also, Leslie Frazier, who's their defensive coordinator, was a longtime defensive backs coach as well. So they're just coaching this. It's a scheme thing. Maybe they're disguising coverages, whatever the case may be. But, yeah, if you've got guys that know how to get defenses to force turnovers, then they can carry something like this. So I agree. I think people are fading that with the Bills, and it is something that I've looked at as well and have considered as a fade. But I'm definitely going to take a different look and probably a different approach to it now that you talked about that, and I think it is a really, really strong point to make. So I do like the Bills here, plus the 3. We'll move to a couple of very, very ugly games here this week. This is an ugly card of dogs. So if you're looking for favorites, I'm sorry, but you're not going to find them here. The Cleveland Browns. They're getting 12 points here against the Detroit Lions. They're bad. Believe me, nobody knows that more than I do with everything that I have to hear from friends and local media and all that type of stuff. They are coming off the bye, but this Browns defense, pretty underrated. Just 4.9 yards per play allowed. Now, I understand that they're very good against the run. Detroit doesn't run the football. But this Greg Williams defense has been coming around throughout the season. And, I know they play the safeties way off the ball, and a lot of times I don't get it. But still, they're doing a good job of limiting really big plays. And when you're getting 12 points and you're able to limit big plays, that's going to keep you in the game. The Browns have had success running the football, so maybe they sustain a little bit of offense here in this one. But I just don't think that the Lions are in a good position to cover a number as big chalk. They had the win against Green Bay on the road, so you pick up a road division win. Now you got a short week. Then you play the Bears the following week, and then the Vikings on Thanksgiving. So I just think this is one of those traditional flat spots for Detroit here where this game is about getting in and getting out with a win, and they don't care by how many points, whereas I think the Browns coming off the bye give a pretty good effort here.
Yeah, I agree. It's fun. So I bet against Detroit. I like the Packers quite a bit last week, and it's one of those where whether you're betting yourself or you're giving plays out to other people to bet, they're betting their money on it. You lose a betting or backing a team 1 or 2 times in a row, and you're scared to do it again. And so, Detroit burned me last week, but this is one where you have to bet Cleveland. I think it's one of there's 2 games on the board that I'm looking at that I'll actually have my money on, and this is one of them. So I agree with you wholeheartedly at plus 11.5 maybe in the contest. I actually forgot what the number is in the contest, but it's the right side. It is, and when it comes down to it, the number is just too high. You're getting 12 in the contest. Wow, I forgot about it. It was actually 12 earlier in the week, so that's an extra point there. Hopefully that doesn't get to the point where it's 10 and then everyone's using the Browns at plus 12. Sometimes you're rooting against the early week moves. You want them to move on Sunday or something. Regardless, yeah, I can't disagree with anything here on this spot off the bye. And I'm going to look up real quick. I'm pretty sure Cleveland's still by far the best team in the league in opponents' yards per rush. By far. Yeah. They're 2.9 yards per carry. Second best is Denver at 3.4. So no one can run against them. And that sometimes, I guess, one thing I guess would have some sort of reservation here back in Cleveland would be that Detroit never really can run the ball very well, and whenever they just flip the switch to, all right, Stafford throw every time, is when the Lions start scoring points. But they're pretty stubborn for like the first half of football, and they generally will throw in the second half a ton, whether they're from behind or even if it's a close game. They just seem to make that adjustment at halftime. They're not going to be able to run the ball early. They're going to be stubborn and try to run the ball early. So anyways, for the betting side of everything, I'm going to be looking at backing Browns, at least splitting my bet full game in first half and potentially majority on the first half, because I do anticipate Detroit to play slower early like they've done, and whether it's close or maybe they're even behind, in that second half they'll start throwing more often, which is where you can beat the Browns defensively. And so anyway, Browns first half, I'm not sure if it's quite 7 as far as the number goes. It's probably more like 6.5. I'll pull that up in check. I'm not sure if many people even have first half lines out. I am seeing it right now, and for some reason I can't see it on the board. So, there it is. It is 7 at one place, but it's mostly going to be 6.5, I think. But that's worth betting, I think, or at least splitting some of your action on if you want to play the Browns.
And I think you get a little bit of recency bias in this number, too, in the sense that Detroit looked really, really good on Sunday Night Football offensively with 482 yards, but then they couldn't get in the end zone. And last week they have 417 yards, 353 through the air. But Green Bay is a mess right now with what's going on with their offense and, of course, all the injuries that they have. So with the short week, with 2 division games coming up, and that game against the Bears, if the Bears win this week, it becomes a fairly big game. And then, of course, the short week annual Thanksgiving game against Minnesota, a huge game. It just feels like one of those spots for Detroit where they don't really show up here. And one other thing, you talk about them being stubborn and forcing to run in the first half. What if they're trying to protect the double-digit lead here in the second half and they can't run the ball on the Browns? Maybe the back door opens up for the Browns if they're able to, actually move the football. But that's another consideration here, too. When you're up by 12 in the NFL, you're kind of looking ahead to the next week already. And if they can't run the ball to put this game away in the second half, maybe it gives Cleveland an extra possession or two to try and pick up that garbage time touchdown. Who knows if it'll be Deshaun Kaiser or Cody Kessler, or I don't know if they roll Bernie Kosar out of retirement or something like that. But maybe the Browns should have some opportunities here in the second half if the back door is needed. One more game that I really like for the card here, and again, this one's pretty ugly, but I think that I'm on the right track with this one. The Miami Dolphins on Monday Night Football here, they're catching 9 against the Carolina Panthers. To me, this looks like a number that's just too high. Miami's defense has played pretty well here throughout the season, but the Carolina offense has not, and that's a big part of the equation here for this one in this game for me. Cam Newton, terrible at the outset, decent in the middle, not so great here over the last few weeks. Jonathan Stewart and Christian McCaffrey each have less than 3 yards per carry, so they can't run the football at all. Dolphins don't have a bye, but they get the extra day here to give themselves a little bit more time to prepare, a little bit more time to rest. Carolina has their bye next week, so maybe a little bit of a look ahead there off of back-to-back division wins against Tampa Bay and Atlanta. But this one, much like the Lions game to me, sort of feels like a, hey guys, let's win and get out type of game. And when you have that type of mentality where you're not looking to win a game big, you're not looking to cover a number, sometimes you kind of hurt yourself a little bit with some complacency, with a little bit of hesitance. So I just think this number is way too high. I think Adam Gase maybe found something last week with the running backs catching more passes. I know Oakland's defense is awful, but I think maybe he found something schematically that he likes with Jay Ajayi out of the lineup. So this is just a number that's too high to me. I think it's a line value grab, and I think also situationally, I just don't expect Carolina to be as invested as they're going to need to be to cover 9 points.
Yeah, and on top of that, Carolina's coming out of 2 big division wins to beat the Buccaneers, and then the home game against the Falcons, where everyone was betting Atlanta. Panthers won that game outright. So, if there's ever kind of a little flat spot here in the middle of the season, it may be this non-divisional, not even not even an NFC team here facing Miami, hosting Miami. I will say this: I was reminded. I used Dolphins +3 in my head. I thought I lost that game. I realized that they went for 2 and got it, and I actually pushed in the contest using the Dolphins against Raiders last week. So I'm glad you brought that up. In my head, I thought I had lost it, but I'll take the push now. It's like a bonus half point I didn't know I actually had in my head. So now I'm happy. I'm good with the Dolphins. If you want to use them, they're on my good side again. So I think that's fine. Take the 9 and run with it. Yeah,
and like I said, I mean, I think part of it too is, you got a guy like Adam Gase, and he's been very frustrated, and he's done so publicly with his offense. And maybe Jay Ajayi was just a problem. Maybe he didn't know how to use it. Maybe he didn't in the run blocking scheme, or he wasn't protecting in pass pro or something like that. I don't know. But, he talked about how he liked using Kenyon Drake and Damian Williams out of the backfield here. And it's like the first compliment that he's had about this offense all year long. So maybe there is a little bit of something there. Maybe there is something that's going to change a little bit for this Dolphins team. And, like I said, I think 9 points is too many. So the picks that are almost definitely going to be on my card here, barring any kind of weird injury situation or anything like that. Of course, obviously, as we found out last week, that's very much possible. The Buccaneers +2.5, Bills +3, Browns +12, Dolphins +9. So for those of you that are good at math, that's only 4. I've got one more game I got to pick out of my leans list here. And I'll just run down these real quickly, Cheetah, and if you got some thoughts on them, please feel free to throw them out there. But looking at the Chicago Bears -5.5, I don't know what this is going to look like for the consensus, but obviously we've seen that Green Bay is just not good offensively. The Bears defense is very good. It's a scary number with Mitch Trubisky, but Bears -5.5 could possibly make the cut here. Jaguars -3.5. They're number 9 in the rotation order. This one looks a little bit too easy to me, kind of like last week's against the Bengals. And the fact that the numbers come down a little bit does worry me. So I probably won't be on this one, but I will mention it here. Cross-country trip off the bye for the Chargers. Their offense is pretty one-dimensional, and Jacksonville can stop the pass. They can get after the quarterback, make Phillip Rivers uncomfortable. So Jacksonville might be, maybe a play here in this one. And then the other one, Titans -4.5. And the only notes I have for this are Bengals blow because they're just bad.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting about the San Diego matchup is they're generally like bottom, I don't know, off the top of my head, they're probably bottom third, in rushing efficiency. And that's how you have to beat Jacksonville. And Jacksonville's been so good defending the pass with their pass rush and just opponent yards per attempt against the pass, despite having a pretty weak rush defense themselves, that they still have the best overall defense now in the NFL. So if you're trying to throw on them, you're done. And you're doing it off of a bye. Maybe you've seen some things in film for 2 weeks that Rivers can take advantage of and exploit. I don't know. I kind of lean the Jacksonville side too, even though, and it seems like the Chargers kind of get bet every week because they never perform to supposed expectation. And so to see it come down doesn't surprise me. And I'm fine. If this got to 3, I'd definitely be buying Jacksonville, I think, as a bet. So I like that one as far as your leans go the most, even though you're worried because it has come down. The Chargers get bet every week. I wouldn't really sweat it. And I don't even think they've covered even half of their games. So far, betting against the Chargers team has been positive.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like you said, that is a team. I don't know why it is. I don't know if it's Rivers. I don't know if it's the skill position guys they've had. I don't know if it's some of the big names that they have on defense with Bosa and Ingram. But yeah, you're right. I mean, every year it feels like this is a team that somebody puts expectations on before the year. Season win total gets bet up. Somebody throws the Hail Mary on their futures, and they struggle to be 500. So maybe it is just one of those things. I don't know. But Cheetah, it's always a pleasure, man, to talk with you about the Super Contest. I thoroughly enjoy it. Good luck to you with your individual entry and your team entry here this week, and I'll talk to you again next week.
That sounds good. Have a good one.